Alright, so here's another episode of 6 Reels Deep, and here we will be celebrating the 10th anniversary of Guillermo Del Toro's Crimson Peak, aka Beware of Crimson Peak. So,
Crimson Peak.
Yeah. So this is not going to be like a play-by-play of every single thing that happened in that film, right? But I just, wrote down some notes and I had some thoughts on the film itself, right? So pre-ramble time, and then we'll just jump into the show itself, right? So for me, right, this is a pretty interesting film, right? Because it was shown theatrically in Trinidad, right? I don't think it ran for too long.
Remember, I think I saw it while I was still living in Trinidad, actually, if I remember correctly.
Didn't you review that with us?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. No, right. No. Here's what happened. I think you, CC, look at this, reunion. Wow, look at that, right? Yeah,
look at that.
Wow.
Yeah,
you saw it. I didn't get the chance to see it. I don't know why. I think it. I don't know, maybe life just got in the way. But yeah, you saw it. You talked about it. You loved it. I remember that. But yeah, I didn't get a chance to see it. Ricardo, did you see it theatrically or no?
Oh, I didn't see it theatrically. I don't remember seeing that theatrically.
Yeah, so look at that, right? But yeah, so right, so for me, right, so I eventually saw it when it came out on digital. I liked it, right? And I think I saw it before year's end, and I had to look back at my old videos and I realized, oh wow, that was not in my top 10. I don't think it was in my honorable mentions neither, right? But yeah, it wasn't there, right? So for me, right, it's only after the fact I sort of realized that, wow, this movie didn't do well in the box office, right? And I wanna really touch on that, in this pre-ramble here, right? So Del Toro, absolutely love the guy. Didn't know about his work until I was familiar with Mimic when it came out back in 97. I was like, oh, Mimic, okay, I remember it showing USA, I saw it, but I just saw the name Guillermo Del Toro. I was like, oh, okay, this guy, all right, interesting, right? But it's when Blade 2 came out in 2002. I was like, oh, okay, this person, right? And then eventually, as I got cable and internet, that's where I learned. Oh, he did Chronos and he did Devil's Backbone, right? And then when Hellboy came out, it was really off the strength of Blade 2. I was like, all right, Hellboy, Del Toro, all right, I'm there, right? And for me, what I love about Hellboy, right? I'll get to the point with this, right? Is that with Hellboy, right? This was where, he was kind of introducing people to this brand new world, right? This comic book world. I know it's based off a comic book, guys. I know, right? But it's not a comic book that I was familiar with, right? So I love the fact that with this film, he was kind of testing the waters. I was like, all right, okay, let's try this character. Let's try this little beat here. Let's try this moment. Okay, people find it stretch a little bit. All right, let me, he's just trying things out now. And then he sort of kind of looked back all right, the show is really good, and I think the movie is really good. But he was like, all right, how can I make this better? What can I tweak? What can I make better, right? And then we got what I think is a superior film, a better film in my opinion. One of my all-time favorite Del Toro films, Hellboy 2, The Golden Army, right? For me, I'm not even going to get into a review of this, but I said I love the film, right? But for me, dog, the moment I saw an elf with a spear doing kung fu, a kung fu kata, basically, I was like, this show is for me. And he's doing this in the sewers. I was like, this movie is for me. This movie is for me. Del Toro have that energy about him that I love, where he could just go wild and crazy with his creativity. I love that, right? So, from there, I became a fan, right? Of course, before that, there was Pan's Labyrinth, and I mean, that movie blew up, right? And rightfully won Academy Awards, and yes, it is one of the best films of the 2000s. I own it on on Blu-ray courtesy of Criterion Collection, right? So yeah, as my dogs start barking, right, whatever. So yeah, for me, I'm bringing this up, right, because I thought that as far as his output goes, right, one of his biggest surprises for me, and it turned out to be a really enjoyable film for me, right. I would not honestly put this as one of the greatest films he's ever made, right? But it's still one of my all-time favorite films from him, right? That would be 2013's Pacific Rim. I'll never forget seeing that for the first time in IMAX, loving everything about it, though. I could see its influence in I would say, in the monsterverse that Warner Brothers have.
Yes.
Look at Godzilla vs. Kong, right? Look at that. That is literally inspired by Pacific Rim. Kong Skull Island. You could tell, you could see the influence of Pacific Rim in those movies, right? But in particular, Godzilla versus Kong, especially that fight that they have in Hong Kong, that is straight up from Pacific Rim, right? So yes, we saw Pacific Rim. We praised the hell out of that movie. That was one of my favorite movies of that year. I own that movie on Blu-ray, and I am so happy to see that, right? But I bring this up, right, for two reasons. One, because there was a sequel that came out. And in my head, I was like, all right, he will do the sequel, but it's because the sequel came out after, I think it's around the time or afterwards, he put out The Shape of Water that would earn him the still surprising but rightfully deserved win, not just for Best Director, but for Best Picture of the Year. But I was like, yeah, I mean, Del Toro is now in the GOAT status, similar to like, Christopher Nolan and whatnot, right? And to me, like when Pacific Rim 2 came out, I was like, oh, he not attached to it. It's like, I made a joke like, oh, he's beneath Pacific Rim. Like, oh, this is beneath me, dude. I make Oscar movies now. I don't need to do Saturday morning cartoons. No, I don't need to do that. You know what I mean? But I mean, Pacific Rim 2 was fun, but it's not a show that I recap. I only saw it once in cinema. I was like, all right, that was cool. I enjoyed it as a matinee film, right? But it couldn't hold a candle to the first film, right? Right. And the point of all this, right, is that when it came to Crimson Peak, right, I think one of the reasons why the movie did not perform well, I don't want to say it bombed, right? But I think the reason why it underperformed is because it came directly after Pacific Rim. So people's expectations were just too high. It's like, oh my God, a new Del Toro movie. Holy shit, right? And because he's pulling from one of his older films, Devil's Backbone, I don't think that especially American audiences were ready for a movie like this. A movie that was just an unapologetically gothic romantic film, right? People just wanted the scares. They wanted more of the horror stuff that they would tease that with, Hellboy and what they got in full detail with, Pan's Labyrinth and Blade 2. Like maybe a lot of people wanted that and they didn't really get that, right? But because it harkens back so much to Devil's Backbone, I mean, I know a lot of people probably didn't even know about that film until, Pan's Labyrinth blew up, right? So I feel at the end of the day, it was all about audience expectations, right? And like I looked at the trailers themselves, right? And I was like, no, the trailers kind of tell you what the movie is, though. It's just that they lean a little too much into the whole ghost stuff, but they kind of tell you what the show is about. It's like the marketing was misleading, right? I guess maybe it's because it was released in October. Maybe people thought this was going to be like the scariest thing ever. It's like, no, that's not what it was, right? But I guess it's if people were familiar with his work before Blade 2, they would have understood what he was coming from with this, right? And just basically where he was at as a director, right? Because remember, it'll be like a few years later on that he will, put out his Oscar winner. That would be, The Shape of Water, right? But I'll close this, right? In preparation for this, right? Like right after I recap this film, right? And I absolutely enjoy this film way more on a second view. I only saw the movie once on digital, right? But watching it again, I was like, wow, but like this was like so slept on, boy. This movie is great, right? Kind of selling myself out there, right? Yeah, usually what I do after I recap films, right? I always love to watch reviews of those films which came out at that time, right?
Oh,
and the one film that the one review I'll single out is the one that I shared with CC here, right? Which you'll get to last after we get to Ricardo. Yeah, Jeremy Johns' review of it, right? Where I know CC will say that he totally misunderstood the film because he was just basically saying in a nutshell that you could have just take the ghost elements out and the story would have still been bland. He didn't really care for the characters at all, and he felt like it was it's supposed to be a scary movie, but it's not, so it's bad because it's not scary and it's uninteresting to him. And I was like, I understand where you're coming from. I get where he was coming from, and I could tell from that review that's how a lot of people felt when they saw that film for the first time. Like, I don't think that I think they came in for the ghosts and the horror, but not for the gothic romance, which is show mainly leans towards, right? I think that is why. But that's how it was reflected in that review. I was like, now I understand why that movie underperformed the way it did, right? But I know you have your bone to pick on that, CC, so you'll get to that later, right? But yeah, Ricardo, take it away. Just thoughts on when you first saw the film, how you felt about it, and how it relates, how you felt it relates to Del Toro's, career before and afterwards.
Yeah, he was like, again, mostly because of Pacific Rim, and I remember like already, same guy who did Hellboy, Pacific Rim was like a big hit. I think that was 2013, 14 when Pacific Rim came out.
Pacific Rim
Oh,
was
same year as Man of
2013.
Steel, right?
Oh,
Yeah, Man of Steel.
yeah, it was 13. It was
Yeah, yeah.
13.
Yeah, I know it was. I remember it same year as Man of Steel. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yes. And
that was a
Lone
big,
Ranger.
right. But it was
Yes,
like that
which
to me was like the big,
believe it or not, I remember seeing, not caring for, but there was one critic. There was one critic on RogerEbert.com that actually put it on the top 10 list. You know, they love that film. And now I like, all right, maybe I should like sit down and rewatch this, because I was kind of harsh on that movie, The Lone Ranger.
Oh yeah, that was crap.
I was harsh in that movie. I was harsh.
Yeah, that was not the crap with Johnny Depp playing
That one,
yeah, that bullshit.
that
Yeah,
government
yeah,
speak out. Yeah. That
yeah, that was
person
bullshit.
loved that movie. I was like, this
serious?
is
Okay,
okay.
it was. I remember it was one. It was bullshit. Two. It was. It lost Disney as a money. If I remember.
Oh yeah, it did. But
yeah,
yeah,
no.
moving on. But
That movie was such a flop that apparently that is the film that killed the production deal between Disney and Jerry Bruckheimer's company. Like, that's why they stopped making their like big sports films and their blockbusters after that, because like Lone Ranger lost both companies so much money. I think it's also interesting because it was also this weird moment where I don't know. I feel like because he's had a bit of a redemption story over the last few years, I think we forgot that like at the time that Lone Ranger came out, we were so sick of Johnny Depp's shtick, you know?
Oh no, yeah, and like it was thing. It was kind of.
We were tired of it.
Yeah, he was really tired by that point. And then I know what do you call it? And it was kind of borderline racist at parts. And like, yeah, none of that I was feeling.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it was. I couldn't get into any of that. So moving on from that. Anyway,
moving on from that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, so yeah, I was hyped for that, and then so when this came out, it's like, all right, it's a smaller, more interesting film, and I didn't expect it to be like, like to blow me away and anything like that. It's like, no, I just going for the visuals, the aesthetics, and the idea is a gothic romance. So like, all right, and that is what I got, and it turned out to be pretty good. And well, it's because of your review at the time. I saw it after. I didn't see it when you saw it. I thought it was great. So like, all right, yeah, we go and cook with this. And so that's it. Moving on.
Yeah, so before we jump into the film itself, right? But yeah, CC, just your thoughts on the film, when you first saw it, especially in relation to his earlier work, or like when you were exposed to more of Del Toro's work, and of course that Jeremy Jahns review.
Oh boy. Well, the first thing I want to kind of signal is I find it really interesting, but if you look over Del Toro's box office, I'm pretty sure that consistently his films always did better outside of the US than in the US. So that's just one point to make. I think up until this point, I will flag Crimson Peak as a very important shift for Del Toro, and I'll elaborate on what I mean by that shift in just a moment. But the thing about the film that is so interesting to me is that my defining moment, I like to tell people that one of my defining moments as like a cinephile, as a nerd, just as an art appreciator in general, is there was this one time, I think back in the 2000s, where there were where I had the TV to myself and I was channel surfing, and on one channel it was playing Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, and on another channel it was playing Hellboy 2: The Golden Army. I had seen neither film at the time, and I kind of kept flipping back and forth between the two movies until I finally settled and just finished watching Hellboy 2: The Golden Army. And I actually didn't see The Dark Knight until I was in college, like years later. And I feel like this tells you everything you need to know about me. I have loved Del Toro for the longest. I think the Hellboy films were my introduction to him. Later, I watched all of his films, Kronos, Devil's Backbone, Mimic. I own just about all of them on DVD at this point in time. I think what I've always appreciated about him is that he genuinely, like, his artistic obsession with the monstrous, but not monster. Like he's like, the way he talks about monsters as patron saints is something that I've always found really interesting. And like, one of his favorite movies of all time is the film Freaks from the 1930s, and he flags that as a movie that it's because it's this carnival movie about all of these sideshow performers, and it's a movie where if you watch the film, the sideshow performers and all of these quote unquote freaks are actually like really fully formed human beings with their own internal worlds and lives and everything. And the film is almost quite radical for showing that. But the real monsters are the strong man and the like dancing girl character, who are these like physically beautiful but like wicked and cruel people. And I think that this is tells you about like the fact that this film is so influential. Del Toro tells you about everything about Del Toro's filmography. Like if you watch his films, even something like Hellboy 2: The Golden Army, the bad guys being the elves, who are these like, you know, perfectly almost beautiful, like blonde, like, you know, creatures, whereas the main guy is an elf, and then like the good guys in contrast are, you know, this demon with a sawed off hand, and this woman with like fire powers, and the creature, and like this guy who's like the creature from the Black Lagoon. And this is what has captivated me about Del Toro and his filmography, and why he is to this day still one of my favorite filmmakers of all time and for all time. I think Crimson Peak represents a fascinating transition, and I consider myself quite privileged that I saw that film in theaters, and I was kind of there during this transition, because up until this point, he had kind of been double dipping, I want to say, where he had been going to Europe and back to Mexico to make art films or horror, or like, you know, quote unquote art films, right? So things like Pan's Labyrinth and Devil's Backbone and things like that, which are more kind of quote unquote art films. They're still horror movies, but they're also like art films. They're also about, you know, politics and the Spanish Civil War, and they've got all these more complicated ideas. And then he is going back to the States to make blockbusters. So it is through the States that he is making Blade 2, and he is making Hellboy and Hellboy 2 and Pacific Rim. And he's kind of doing this double dipping thing where he gets to make the big spectacular Hollywood movies, and he goes back to Europe to make art films. And I think that Crimson Peak is the moment that he kind of transitions to doing, because if we think about 2013, comic book movies are becoming mainstream. Del Toro was one of the early adopters of comic book film and like fantasy film in general. And at this point in time, they are now coming into the mainstream. And Del Toro himself has said, because someone asked him if he would, because at one point he was developing a Justice League Dark movie. Someone was asking him if he would be interested in making that film now with James Gunn in charge. And he's like, well, not really. Like, I was more interested in making that sort of movie at a time when every blockbuster wasn't a comic book movie. And so at this point in time, like, he is less interested in that. And I feel like that's kind of, so he transitions. And I feel like the other thing we have to remember is that because every Del Toro movie is a labor of love, and every Del Toro movie is made with practical effects and the best actor, and like, you know, these actors that he loves working with, every Del Toro movie is a labor of love. And he has said that I think for every film he's made, there have been 3 that he was not able to make. And he spent a lot of time in development hell. Like we were talking earlier. So Pacific Rim comes out in 2013. Crimson Peak doesn't come out until 2015. And before Pacific Rim, the last movie he had made was Hellboy 2: The Golden Army, which was made in 2008. So there's this 7-year period between Hellboy 2 and Pacific Rim where he is developing different projects, trying to get certain things off the ground. I think this was during the period where he almost developed The Hobbit.
Right.
And that kind of fell apart, right? And so
right. That fell through, right.
That fell through like dramatically. And so this is kind of Pacific Rim kind of ends up at this point in time. I think it's pretty safe to say that Pacific Rim was his last blockbuster. I don't think at this point in time he's going back to that form of filmmaking. And Crimson Peak is signaling the sort of movies that he is going to make going forward. More literary. You already mentioned like Oscar winning, quote unquote, like doubling down on kind of the art film impulse, but now he is making them within the Hollywood system. Now he is taking all of the connections he made during his blockbuster period, and he is using them to develop blockbusters. And that is how, like, since, you know, we got his Pinocchio movie, we got I'm not, what's the one I'm thinking of? Nightmare Alley, as well. And then, and I think it's actually really appropriate to be talking about Crimson Peak because his Frankenstein comes out in a couple weeks. I think some people have seen it already because it came out a couple film festivals. Yeah. And from what I understand, he is reuniting a lot of the production crew behind Crimson Peak for Frankenstein. So a lot of the costume people and set people and all those people. Because again, Del Toro has always been a very literary filmmaker. If you've ever looked at interviews with the man, his house is full of books. He has cited Frankenstein as like as his favorite, as his pick for the greatest novel of all time, and his love of the Gothic and Gothic romance and like literature and literary. So it makes complete sense to me that his Frankenstein, which is this film he has been trying to develop. I think he said it's the longest film in his career he's been trying to develop, is going to bring a lot of the same Gothic energy that he kind of tested the waters with in Crimson Peak, which of course neatly segues into Jeremy Jahns. For the viewers at home, Matthew texts me and says, hey, we're doing the episode on Crimson Peak, and I want to talk about why the film bombed, and I think this review sums up some things. And he sends me the Jeremy Jahns video, and I do a little jump. I have a jump scare moment because I haven't thought about Jeremy Jahns in a hot minute. But watching his review, what good grief, yeah, no, and like not since being rightfully disgraced for platforming a Matt Walsh documentary, Jesus Christ, but. I think what's interesting about thinking back to 2015, is it's a very interesting time because Jeremy Jahns at that point is one of the big critics on YouTube, if I remember correctly. Like my general sense is that like outside of like the Channel Awesome crowd, when it came to the more popular,
right? Yeah, he was pretty popular. Yeah, he was pretty popular. He's somebody who I haven't listened to in a while. But he blew up a little after Doug Walker and them.
Yeah. I still check out his work though, but it depends on films that I have seen. So if it's stuff that I have not seen, for example, then I won't check them out.
No, yeah, the format's super dated. Like that whole quick jump cut stuff. Them days done. Like whatever. But he was a big guy. He was big 10 years ago, and you understand why. Because he totally fit into the YouTube space back then.
Well, I think what he and Chris Stuckman brought to the space that was at the time considered innovative was that jump cut format. So instead of the Doug Walker format, which I'm going to uncharitably call the book report format, where you just recap the entire plot of the movie beat for beat for beat.
Right.
Chris Stuckman and Jeremy Jahns were very good at getting in and getting out. But what I find interesting about them, and I'm saying this, what I need the audience to understand before I say this, I am a critic. Myself, I have written several pieces of criticism that I have been paid for, and I have gone to film school. So when I say that Jeremy Jahns is an incredibly boring critic, I have nothing for that. So what
Jahns blew up, I think he blew up because of Transformers 2, right?
Yes, that was the review that put him on.
Yeah. So anybody, how I kind of look at that, I just call him the stand-up comic routine type of film critic.
Yeah,
they just have a bunch of bits and jokes, and then they come in and, as you say, they come in and out, and we get to say these things now because how much years pass or whatever it is, but it's kind of still doing the same thing. And look, if it's making them money, then fine. I can't tell them no. But that kind of stuff really kind of I never get into, to be honest.
No, not really. Well, and I think. This is why I have so much more respect for Chris Stuckman, because he has left that space and he is now making his own art, which I had respect for that. But I think the thing about Jeremy Jahns is listening to him talk about Crimson Peak, which as a movie itself, I adore Crimson Peak. I think for me it used to be not one of my favorite Del Toro, but I have grown to my wife is a big fan, and we rewatch it almost every year. And I think through the rewatching it, I'm always surprised how there's always fresh stuff in that movie. There's always new things to appreciate. I'm always struck by, my God, the colors in this are so good. Like the production design and the costume, it's all so well done. So being able to revisit it every year, and then listening to Jeremy Jahns, who's applying this. I don't know if the word I'm looking for is utilitarian, but he's doing this. But I don't know why this was so popular in the 2010s. But this weird style of criticism that's if this thing is extraneous to your movie, just cut it out. Your film should be efficient. Your film should only do this. And I'm because he makes this whole argument of the ghosts don't really meaningfully contribute to the movie, and I'm but they do though. The ghosts contribute atmosphere, they contribute tone, they give you a certain sense of the mystery, and there's a whole mystery at the center of the film that drives the film so beautifully. And I really feel like the ghosts and the main character's connection to the supernatural, to the world of the dead, are a really important part of that mystery, and it makes it I don't know, like, it's so interesting to think about watching the movie and first of all saying, oh, I've seen this plot everywhere. And I'm like, where? Like, Jeremy John says over and over again in his review, like, oh, you've seen this story everywhere. And I'm like, wait, literally where? Like, what movies are you watching that you have seen this story that the story of Crimson Peak, which is this wild gothic love story mystery thing, is like, feels tired to you, while also flagging the thing about it that's one of the most interesting and saying the film could do without it. And then also praising the visuals of the film, right? Like praising the film for its costumes and saying like, oh, but I wish that they were tied to a better story. And I'm like, what? You have disconnected the film and you've done it in a way like these elements that you're talking about as if they're disconnected from each other are all incredibly connected. Also, him talking about being bored during the finale was a moment that I was like, oh, Jesus, my guy. I was sitting there going, you were bored during the finale of Crimson Peak? I'm sorry, were there not enough guns? Like, were there not enough people shooting each other? Like, what are you? And then again, I feel like, yeah, it's this, and I feel like Jeremy Johns is doing something very interesting in that he's accidentally summing up why Del Toro pivoted to art film, because Jeremy Johns is not saying, I mean, you're right, Matthew. Jeremy Johns is not saying anything that you know, people in America weren't saying on social media. Again, Del Toro's movies have always done better internationally. But even Pacific Rim, a movie we all agree is great, I remember Chris Stuckman calling it a style over substance movie and saying that he didn't think it was all that good. And I'm like,
one of the problems with that space, unfortunately, is that it is one of those strange, as I say, the utilitarian problem is that it is an escalation speech. So everybody and their mother have to say, somehow get attention by seeing something like, or probably outright wrong, but probably challenging, maybe. Like, that's how I think. And look, I kind of like that. Like, you know, you need to put yourself in the conversation. So, like, how, you know, people are going to click on me by me saying this thing. And you have people who will just say absolutely ridiculous things, like, to a point where it's like, all right, well, you're not really saying anything at all. You like totally out of the discourse. Like, Armand White, for example. Like, he's somebody I just cannot take seriously. Oh, my God. But it is the problem. Yeah, no, right. But the problem is that the entire space is a moral hazard of ingratiating that type of discourse. And I think that's the way it is. It's like, look, I don't think these guys are necessarily bad actors, but it does encourage bad acting.
It depends.
Right.
Yeah,
I think
if I could just interject quickly, right? I actually saw that Chris Stuckman review after Jeremy Johns, and I should have shared that with you as well. But I don't know. I just figured that you would have checked it out for yourself, right? Like you would have been, oh, you know, who else is popular? I would have checked out Chris's as well. But here's the thing, right? I feel like on retrospect, right? Like I understand where he's coming from. I was actually surprised when he said he didn't care much for didn't care. He said that he felt like the lead, right, wasn't given much to do, unfortunately, right? She was just sort of there to react to things. That one caught me by surprise, like, oh, okay. But that's what I keep saying. That this space is encouraged. That's what I say. These spaces encourage like statements as like, well, you know, I would have never like listened to you otherwise if you didn't see something like that. That kind of thing. Right. It's weird. Like I get it. It's one of those trade-offs of, oh, I have to see this thing as opposed to, because that's the problem with film criticism, is that you can kind of play in that nebulous space. So you don't have to go as ridiculous as say Cinema Sins or whoever it is. And by the way, like I don't want to get into this super toxic, you know, back and forth about, well, you know, I don't really mean it like that and it's all a joke. Sorry, that's bullshit. I've never believed that for a second. But that's the old problem, is that is this. Yeah, is this thing that's naturally encouraged disingenuous discourse, unfortunately. Yes. And that's the problem with guys like this. The world maybe move on from people like that. Yeah, go ahead, sorry. Sorry.
Yeah. So many of them it's exactly what you're saying. So many of them used humor as a fallback, as a cop-out.
Right.
Like they're not actually making jokes, but it's just like, if you take their point seriously and you criticize them, they go, I don't know why you're taking it so seriously, man. I was just making a joke. Like Jeremy Johns literally saying like, oh, maybe I would enjoy Crimson Peak better if I was drunk. And I'm like, oh, okay. So you're creating this little fallback so that if anyone challenges you on this bullshit review, you can say, I made a joke at it. I don't know why you're taking this so seriously, man.
That's true.
I feel like that's why.
Yeah. And almost the entire space does this. But this is the problem, is that, you know, it's outright dishonest. It's again, I don't think Jeremy Johnson particularly bad. Like, it has some.
They're
like,
worse.
really,
I agree.
by far worse, especially when it started to get rare, like in the dumps and in the whole Snyder cult stuff, and guys, when they started going to lower circles of hell. But to me, it was like, well, he's one of those guys who just, it's fine. Like, for the most part, I don't think I never listened to him I never was a fan of him. Like, so I don't know if he was like this real trash person or anything like that. But like, for the most part, it's like that. But I don't want to spend too much time on this dude in particular because let's talk about the actual movie. But
no.
Yeah.
Well, the only reason,
as I say, no, but the point, Matthew. I just said last point. The point with Matthew is that the reason why, and your point about Del Toro getting into art, because it's like, well, these people have way too much of a voice in that conceit, and if it's that the kind of, if that's the kind of reaction you have to a film, who to me that is just not the kind of any film not for you in that sense. Like,
exactly.
straight up,
don't engage in that. What I'm saying.
But if I just say one last thing, and then we could
exactly.
If I could just say one last thing, and then we could CC, you could wrap up your section, right? I think that in retrospect, right, given where Chris is right now, his debut is going to be screened theatrically in the States. Hopefully, I get to see it digitally by year's end. I hope so. I know for sure that will not show theatrically in Trinidad. If it does, well, holy shit, I'm going to be there, right? But I think that he, in retrospect, he will probably look back at that review and be like, I was wrong with that. I would not be surprised because, around one sec, because around now, he's doing his annual, Halloween, playlist thing, right, where he always covers a horror film, right? I wouldn't be surprised if he does a retrospect review of Crimson's Peak, like, and he looks back at it like, wow, I was wrong about this movie. Wow. And that's
the problem. The ultimate end problem with this kind of stuff is that the problem is that it's next to impossible for me to take you seriously if you don't make something yourself, right? So when it's time for you to make something and you don't put yourself on the lash that you had no problem putting it, that's where you just lose me. So when it's time for you to make something, and many of the more strident creators, like it had this one guy who made I think I got the Irish or something like that, a Scottish guy or something like that, to drink, please drink.
Drinker.
Thank you. Right. So he made a movie. He made a movie himself, and it was kind of bad, but it was like bad in the sense that somebody who not like a trained filmmaker know it better than anybody in Hollywood would make. So obviously people will come down on him. So the question is, if I supposed to give you a blight because you're not a filmmaker, or am I supposed to be as vicious as you were towards these material? Yes or no? That's the big argument. And if you're not going to do that, then we have a problem. In the end of the day, forget about who getting paid or how much money should be paid or whatever it is. The issue is the art. Like that's how I see it. Like Stockman, he finally make his movie. I have no idea how good it is or not. I heard a couple things, not two things, but again, it sounds like just somebody who just, they don't make movies that often. That's it. It's as simple as that. And so it's stuff like that, right? It's that strange back and forth about how it should be. And I don't know what happened, but have a whole crowd of people who just want to be critics and just have no skin in the game. You see the lack of skin in the game, that's where it is losing. And I think that's why it is, and with Del Toro's films, because he is, in my opinion, one of the greatest filmmakers ever, right? Especially of his generation, especially. I can't see how people could be like knocking him. Like he, out of all people, like I understand he's hating on general Hollywood people, but he really transcended the material though, like in almost every way. And so what was the argument here?
Well,
so is that
Here's a good point, right? We've had two other filmmakers try to make Hellboy movies since Del Toro's, and it is only every single time we go back and go, wow, Del Toro was like we didn't like appreciate Del Toro when we had him.
Yep, when we had him, yeah.
Like back when he was like doing like the comic book adaptations, like we just did not appreciate this man. And I think that like this is why I think to me the Jeremy Jahns review is so interesting, because it signals the type of media criticism that we really have at this point. And like the way people are talking about Del Toro online, and it kind of signals the way that talk around him will shift as he makes his transition into, art films, etc. And so it's also interesting because for me personally, because, I completely agree with Ricardo. And I said this earlier, Del Toro is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, in my opinion. And like, he's a filmmaker who's incredibly personal to me. He's a filmmaker who, I looked at what he was doing in the film space and said, I can do that. And I, as an artist, and I want to champion that as a critic. And I think that like being someone who came on your show back in the day and was championing Crimson Peak and then going on YouTube and seeing people like, Chris Stuckman and Jeremy Johns who just did not have time for this movie. That was a defining moment for me because I was like, okay, the type of films that I think are important, there's the people there for them are simply like there's not quite. I'm going to have to fight a little bit for the films that are important to me because because at least in the critical space online at the time, it's gotten better now. I think with the video essay era, it's gotten a lot better.
It kind of died. It kind of died off. Yeah, I'll say in my humble opinion, I think The Last Jedi killed it because you get to see like some of the worst like impetuses and impulses of people throughout that whole period. So like, all right, well, what are we doing here? Like, what are we doing here? Like, some guy put out like a 7-hour video on this fucking thing, and like, what's this? Like, what are we doing here? Like, and then the whole thing just became like super toxic, and like again, it went down several circles of hell. So I couldn't get into any of that, and like I just you as a creator, I just trying to be a creator. It's like, at a certain point you're not really doing anything. Like, it's like, we just back and forth and arguing with somebody. It's starting to become ridiculous. So it's that. But yeah, I don't know. Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I everything you said was completely correct. No, I was going to say that I think that if you are someone who appreciates art, or writes about art or creates, there will come a point where you decide the kind of critic or artist you want to be, and I think that I don't know. I think like there comes a point where you're either going to go in the more serious direction or you're going to go in the more popular direction. And I think, I think, yeah, I know for me that like that moment was Crimson Peak, and so I have a deep soft spot for this movie personally. But then I agree with you, seeing where internet film discourse and especially YouTube film discourse went and where it was and where it has kind of gone now. It's also been really interesting. So yeah, it becomes a very interesting flashpoint, and I feel like at the center of that discourse and the kind of films I feel like that crowd used to kind of champion versus the kind of films that I feel like the YouTube essay space are more interested in. Del Toro has always been at the center of that conversation, because if you look at people like The Critical Drinker and you look at people who really dislike people who were never that big a fan of Del Toro, when they get the chance to make their own movies or they get the chance to champion their favorite films, you kind of end up with a lot of kind of hyper competent but not very interesting action films, if that makes sense. Like The Critical Drinkers movie just being kind of an action movie. And then you're like, okay, so this makes sense to me why, and as I was saying, as Del Toro is drifting towards his first Oscar win, he is leaving behind these sorts of people who never really liked him in the first place. I don't know if Chris Stuckman was ever I know he has changed now. I actually give the man credit. He's very publicly grown up.
Right. No, but that's the problem.
I love the man.
That's the problem. His transformation and to watch the crowd turn on him, because there's a whole bunch of people turn on him.
Yeah. I mean, last year with that whole bullshit that we address here.
Yeah. You did a whole episode on it.
Madam Web, right?
No, but that's your point. Again, look, we could get into. This is a statement I used to believe, and even this is a kind of bad faith statement in a sense. But I've always said, I don't fully believe it anymore. But I used to always say that the worst creator is better than the best critic. Right? I don't believe that anymore. But it's something that I kind of in that same space. Like, my attitude is that if you don't at least make an attempt to make something. And ultimately, we could get into if I wanted to spoil the movie, I would have get into that aspect of it, of just the idea of sacrifice, right? The idea of putting yourself out there. That's the main point. You have to. Sorry, I think you have to go on the altar for some lashes yourself, right?
Yes.
And that's the problem. We have way too many people who figure out a way to have a discourse without getting licks themselves.
Well, that's where humor comes in.
Exactly, and so you're getting to that disingenuous aspect of it, because exactly the Schrodinger's joke stuff now, where the person
Schrodinger's assholes, I like to call it.
Exactly, yeah, they claim to have a real critique, and then when you hit them back, they do this Mott and Bailey kind of back step kind of nonsense. But my attitude is not even that. I don't even get into the aspect of being a critic. My attitude is you have to create something. You can't get away from it. Right?
Yep.
You can't say, well, it's a meta and it's meant to be a joke. No. That's the problem. The problem is that a lot of people just trying to figure out a way to have a double standard. It's always some kind of strange double standard they try to have for themselves. And when it's time for you to actually make something or to do something interesting or clever, you'll see them, hate on something or say this is nonsense. And then when it's time for them to do it, they'll either do the exact same thing or do something worse. And it's like, all right, well, time for me to be as vicious towards you. Time for you to get your bite. Time for you to get your licks. And they don't want it. And it's really fascinating to watch that person. I forget who made this point. They want to watch you will burn, but they don't light themselves on fire first. Right? Is that type of person. If you wonder what you will burn, you have to light yourself on fire first. Right? I'm that kind of guy. You have to have that skin in you. Sorry to say it. Right? And so is interesting to watch that these type of people operate in that space, right? And you see it across the board, right? With all kind of things, right? With this type of politics or whatever it is, right? You start to make dark jokes against somebody like this, they have a meltdown. We're going to get into that right now, right? But you get the point, right? With Crimson Peak as a film, again, we didn't get into the movie yet, but. But it's interesting, like the discourse around the movie and why it exists as it is, because a lot of people just had such bad faith about the movie. And I didn't watch it at the time. I took a while to see it. I saw it like months after. And like, oh, but this was like actually good for what you want to do. Like once it's time to make something. And again, because of your review, I was like, let me just think about it different. I would have I was that guy at the time, admittedly, right? I would have been like, this is what you're trying to do, and I'm not really into this, and blah, 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 blah. And everybody with the crowd, and you get to do your up click, you click them plus on the thing, and you laugh at the silly jokes or whatever. But I don't know, it's like an interesting like reflection with that conceit. And to be fair, the opposite end of that also has that problem. Like, I always think of James Rolfe and his enemies, who ultimately end up being like a good guy, ultimately, in all things considered. And so on and so forth, right? It'll go back and forth. But I don't know, like, Del Toro, again, is an artist that he really like evolves in a fascinating way. You have all the money to do it. You could get into, look, he's a white Mexican, so he had the money. We know, right? We could get into all of that, right? But the point is, he's Crimson Peak is one of those really transitional periods as a filmmaker. You're right. It's a nice critical juncture for him now. And it's a movie I really appreciated when because of your review. But looking back at it, it's like, no shit, that's the kind of movies I kind of make do. Like, it's not, you could do popular, you could do things, you could take your licks for that from a money standpoint. But like, it's a really bad environment, and I hope I would like to think that we'll evolve out it, but that don't seem to be the case. Maybe we'll find out. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, I will say in response to that last point, though, I think Del Toro has evolved out of it. I think Del Toro winning the Oscar for Shape of Water was a watershed moment. People who were kind of fans of Del Toro, but not really, left at that point, because Shape of Water is such a weird movie. It's like he originally pitched it to Universal as like his legacy sequel to Creature from the Black Lagoon, and they said, what the hell? And so he made it himself with a different studio. And it's such a weird movie because it's about sexuality and the Cold War and monsters and mythology. Like, a lot of, like, Del Toro has this great sense, and you see this in Crimson Peak, where you can't necessarily tell him he can't include things that he is interested in his movies. Like, it's what you were saying earlier about people who want how the worst critics, and I will say this, I'm calling out people within my own field. The worst critics are people who criticize vulnerability, but do not want to be vulnerable themselves. Because I think if you are a critic, if you're an artist, if you want to make good art, you have to be vulnerable about what you are interested in, what you care about, and the things that you come back to, your interests, essentially.
Yeah, because those things make you you. They make you an individual.
Right. Like, I watched Paul Schrader. I watched a fascinating lecture with him where he says he always says to new screenwriting students, whatever the trend going on, don't bother. They've got hundreds of guys who can do that.
Correct.
You need to do your thing. Like don't chase whatever the trend is at the moment. And like, I think that if you look at Del Toro's filmography, he has gotten increasingly comfortable with his weird little interests, like whether it's, religion and monsters and comic books and anime and manga, but then also like sexuality and politics and like his anxieties about, like, literally the interview recently where someone said, what are you actually afraid of? And he said, politicians. And I said, I can tell that from your filmography. And he's gotten more comfortable with that. So Shape of Water is a movie that is so weird, but is so artful that if you are on the film's wavelength, if you genuinely love art and you love that form of expression and you appreciate the sincerity of what is happening, because you can never accuse a Del Toro movie of not being sincere. You are on board and you celebrate and you're like, oh my God, Del Toro, he did it. He won his Oscar. But if you're the kind of person who never really liked Del Toro in the first place, that was the moment you checked out. Like watching him win the Oscar for Shape of Water, and say that him doing the speech where he was like, my monsters, thank you. If you're a more cynical critic who likes to kind of label sincerity as cringe, that's kind of the moment you're like, because I don't know. I remember that there were a lot of memes around Shape of Water. Like, a lot of people like to make memes about that movie and like to make fun of that movie and like to come up with all kinds of snarky jokes about that movie. But at the end of the day,
listen. I have no problem calling it the fish fucking movie. It is the fish fucking movie. Let's admit that.
It kind of is, though. I mean,
yeah,
it kind of is.
But I make fun of it. No, I have no problem making the jokes, But the issue is whether or not how seriously the jokes are. Like, look, we're seeing it for it is. Like, I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
That's fine. You're right.
Oh yeah. But at the end of the day, like, you're still there clapping with the rest of us when he wins.
Of course,
Oscar.
right?
Like,
exactly.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So, like, the jokes were never so much. That's all. Like, I knew so many people who just tried to be like, "Oh, is this film the secret prequel to Hellboy? Because this is where Abe Sapien came from." And I said, "You are permanently online."
Right. Again, I don't mind jokes like that. Like, if you make it a joke, it's fine. Like, unless it's like something outright egregiously bad, like racism or something like that, make the jokes. The problem with these guys is that they want to do the stand-up routine as if it's part of a real bit.
Yes.
Like, if it's a real criticism. That is my problem. That's the problem. These guys want to play it both ways, kind of bullshit. Now they're talking out to two sides of their mouth. That's the problem. But like, if somebody in a Reddit comment or whatever thread make it, they make the joke, unless the joke is like agreed, like something racist or sexist or whatever. It's like you're crossing the line there. But no, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Like, make that conceit. Make a jokes. I don't have a problem with that. My problem is these people who they demand to be taken seriously until not. It's that type of person.
Right. The kind of that 1-2 punch of Crimson Peak and then Shape of Water was very much the, like, I don't think there was anyone who was excited about his Pinocchio or Nightmare Alley who had not already fallen off, if that makes sense. Like, it's not like the people, there wasn't the same quote unquote disappointment, right? By the time we get to Pinocchio, people knew at that point, it's like, okay, he's doing his own version of Pinocchio. It's going to be stop motion and it's going to be about fascist Italy. Like, you know what I mean? Like, people were on board by that point. They knew what to expect from a Del Toro movie because he had cultivated that audience, and stepping away from that, the first important step of that was Crimson Peak, which is why it is a movie that is very special to me. Yes.
Yeah. Now, listen, I could just listen to you guys, talk about, no, because seriously, this is really, like, fascinating, though. I was just on board everything, right? I didn't really think about it while I was watching this. So it's just like, after I saw the film, I was like, wait, like, people didn't really, like, talk up or praise it as much as I thought, right? Well, at least online, that is, like, especially to the YouTube space, right? That's why I pulled up those reviews, like, oh, okay, now I see, right? I'll just say one last thing, just one last point about that discourse, then we move forward. Bright side is, if you were to do a search for it right now on YouTube, Mark Kermode, right? A critic that I truly respect, right?
Yeah, I generally like Mark Kermode.
Yeah.
Right, I like him, kind of.
Yeah, he loved the film. He absolutely loved the film. Right. And it was just great hearing him say how much he loved it right after hearing Chris and Jeremy say that they didn't like it. That brought me hope. That brought me hope, right? Yeah. So just to jump into the film here one time, right? So, in case you're wondering, if it's still here, thank you very much for sticking around, right? Yes, this is one of those films where people could say, oh, this is not really a horror film. It's really, as Wikipedia calls it, a gothic romance, right? But, it is steeped in the subgenre of gothic horror, and it borrows so much from the haunted house subgenre, right? And this is one thing that surprised me when I recap this, right? It even pulls from Del Toro pulls from his own movie, The Devil's Backbone. I'm like, what? You know what I mean? So I think that it is right to call it a horror, right? But that's the beauty of horror. It could bleed into various genres. So no, this is not the jump scare, a minute type of film, but no, it's much different. But again, I feel like it's because it's not the scariest thing ever. That's why people, especially American audiences, didn't respond to it as much as they wanted to, right? But anyway, but I think, like, in retrospect, I think people were not ready for how for just it being this unapologetically slow burn, melodramatic gothic romance, which for me is one of the things I love about the film. I love how it was just so confident in saying, yes, this is a film it is. You don't like it? Well, I'm sorry, right? So for me, oddly enough, while I was watching this film, right, it kind of reminded me of two films, right? This would be, and when I see the titles, it will make a lot of sense, right? Age of Innocence from Martin Scorsese,
Right.
Oh,
and what is, in my opinion, the best costume drama ever made, in my opinion, from the GOAT himself, the GOD of filmmakers, in my opinion, Barry Lyndon from Stanley Kubrick. I own that movie on Blu-ray, by the way. I need to get the whole of Age of Innocence, right? But that's on my to-do list, right? Anyway, so for me, right? And this is coming from somebody who don't really seek out costume dramas, right? But I also don't seek out, melodramatic films, right? Like, for example, I could kind of see this within the emotional framework of this film, right? Yeah, I could see, like,
it is
I could be wrong, right? But, I could see some Douglas Sirk stuff in it as well, too. Cause I was picking up stuff I was out, like, the films people in the 50s, like Written on the Wind, or Magnificent Obsession, or the one film from him that I saw ages ago. I really do need to recap it. All That Heaven Allows. All of which are in the Criterion Collection, by the way. Yes, I love the Criterion Collection, in case you didn't know, right? But yeah, I bring this up because I could tell, like, that Guillermo is not just drawing from gothic horror films like The Innocents or The Haunting, but he's also pulling from costume dramas and melodramas as well, right? But why I bring up Age of Innocence and Barry Lyndon in particular, right, is because those two films came out after, those two directors' most famous and most critically successful works, right? Or should I say commercially successful works, right? So yeah, Barry Lyndon came after A Clockwork Orange, which is still, in my opinion, the best movie ever made. It is my favorite movie of all time. I guess that says something about me, but I love that film so much. And with Scorsese, this came after Cape Fear. So imagine that, right?
Oh.
Cape Fear, Age of Innocence, Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon. Like, think about that. Pacific Rim.
It's wild.
Crimson Peak. Like, look at that, right? And yeah, as you guys mentioned there, it's just that transitional period. It's like here's what I did the commercial shit. Y'all love the commercial shit? Because, yeah, I mean, with the controversy that Clockwork Orange had, it was a commercial hit, right? But look, I want to do something a little bit more personal to me, and that's why I did this, right? I mean, Cape Fear, right? It's like with Scorsese, right? It's Goodfellas, then Cape Fear, and then you follow this up with Age of Innocence. Like, what? Like, no Robert De Niro? Okay. No, sorry, like no gang shit? Like, what's going on? What? But no, like, you could tell, like, Age of Innocence was really personal to him, and it's one of his greatest films, right? In my opinion, right? But speaking of melodramas and costume dramas, all that kind of stuff, right? This movie looks gorgeous. So the production design deserves its Oscar nomination. It's a shame that it didn't win. I should look up and see which film actually won production design. But yeah, the production design in this is immaculate in my opinion, right? And you could tell that, Guillermo and his cinematographer, that would be Dan Lawson, right, who actually worked on Mimic. That was their first collaboration. He actually worked on The Shape of Water. He worked on John Wick chapters 2 to 4. And CC, if you've ever seen John Wick Chapter 4, god damn, that is one of the most gorgeous shoot 'em up, beat the shit out of people movies ever.
Okay.
Like Ricardo, I was saying this in my review with Ricardo. I was like, they are showing off for that cinematography. I was like, god damn.
It's my second favorite in the franchise.
Okay. I wrestle with 4 and 3. Like, those two are in my top, but I had to decide which one I prefer more. 4 or 3.
No, the first is still my favorite, but the third, second and third don't really work all that well for me. But I find the fourth film is like, oh right, they pick back up on where they should be on.
Right. But yeah, point is that is a gorgeous ass looking action movie. Yeah, it's just pure shoot 'em up glory, right? But whatever. But yeah, and you can tell this is like a perfect choice there, to pull from these old Technicolor films from the 40s and 50s, because stuff like Innocent, like The Innocent, and The Haunting, those are black and white films, so you gotta it has to be a color film, right? And it's up Del Toro's alley anyway, so it has to be like that, right? But I love that he's pulling from those old films in particular, right? That's why this movie looks so great, right? I especially love the use of green, orange, and red. Green in particular, I noticed was used where you see the heroine in the film, especially when she's at her most vulnerable. Like, for example, there's like a bathroom scene that takes place when she moves to this new place, which I'll get into in a bit. Yeah, I love the green tinge that you see in that room. I thought that was really cool, right? That's before she is being, that's before this particular spirit, right? Visits her, right? Well, we'll get to that in a little while, right? No surprise though, the costume design is excellent. It's done by Kate Hawley, sorry. Now I'm no expert when it comes to like late 19th to early 20th century fashion, but it looks so, like the costumes, they look so authentic that I didn't even need to bother to like nitpick and be like, oh, is that how costumes really look like? Blah, blah. I trust Guillermo when it came to that, and I thought that Kate did a great job here, right? So fun fact, she actually worked on the Hobbit films. She worked on Pacific Rim. And anytime I was recording this, she actually worked on Frankenstein. Well, Guillermo Del Toro's Frankenstein movie, which will be out, next month, right?
Which is so odd when you think about it, because with Frankenstein coming out in 2025 and Pacific Rim coming out in 2015, that's been exactly 10 years. Which is so... Isn't that weird? Like, that's such an odd, like...
Well no, you mean this film came out 2015 and Frankenstein is 10 years. Yeah. It's a Pacific Rim. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I don't know. Crimson Peak coming out 2015 and then Frankenstein coming out in 2025. That's... Yeah.
Yeah.
I like...
Yeah. Those things I just sort of picked up on after the fact, right?
You had mentioned, because I was looking it up because you mentioned production design and costume and everything at the Oscars that year. So the film that won at the Academy Award for Best Production Design and Best Costume Design was The Great Gatsby.
Oh, which is a show that, believe it or not, I need to rewatch. I remember the big hype was Baz Luhrmann and Leo and Jay-Z for some reason. But
some reason.
Yeah, I remember seeing it and I thought it was okay, but I'll never forget, it showed up on a particular best of the decade list of the 2010s. Like, oh, well, I guess I should really sit down and watch that film again. Whatever. But yeah, moving on.
And then do you want to know something? Okay, it says hair and makeup went to Dallas Buyers Club. Right. And something that I'm actually shocked about, Crimson Peak wasn't even nominated.
Right.
Oh, you mean for here? For me?
For the Academy Award. Yeah. Hair and makeup. No, for costume design and set too.
Oh, okay. I swear it was nominated for production design.
I know. I thought so too, but I looked and I was like, no Academy nominations at all.
Sad. Well, at least the Academy made it up for him with with Shape of Water and Pinocchio, right? So
that's true.
Okay, there's a bright light at the end of the tunnel. So yeah, so speaking of Pacific Rim, I genuinely forgot that Charlie Hunnam was in this film as well, right? Humdrum, as we make fun of, right? As we like to call him, jokingly, right? But yeah, he headlined Pacific Rim with Idris Elba, you know what I mean? And I thought that he was great in this movie though. And listen, forgive me, folks, I haven't seen this film in a long while, but I forgot that Tom Hiddleston was in this movie as well. Right. This was right after we saw him in Avengers and Thor: The Dark World. It's like, whoa, like Loki, you're in this too. Wow,
Yeah, this was his first turn out to the. I think he really had the best out of the MCU career, to be honest. But I remember him being quite good in this. He totally fit in the work.
And
He's very good in this.
Yeah, and I forgot that Jessica Chastain was in this, right? And in the 2010s, her career was blowing up though, because she was in the Tree of Life, she was in Zero Dark 30. Yeah, so Chastain's name was.
Interstellar.
You're right, Interstellar, which we covered last year. Yeah, so her career was on a rise in 2010s, right? But yeah, I forgot that she was in this movie, right? Because the name that I always remember, and she's a real star in this movie, in my opinion, is Mia Wasikowska. I always get that name wrong, right? Yeah, she plays Edith Cushing. Believe it or not, though, this is the only film that I've seen from her in its entirety. Because going back to Johnny Depp, I never cared to watch Alice in Wonderland or Alice Through the Looking Glass, right? It's not because of her. I just did not want to see a Tim Burton version of Alice in Wonderland, because I watched like the first third of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I was like, nope, that's not for me. And I saw the entirety of Dark Shadows, which also starred Johnny Depp, and that was terrible. I hated that movie. That was one of the worst films of that year. Yeah.
No, I remember thinking, with those Wonderland movies,
Mhm.
friends wanted to watch them, and that's the only reason I watch them. But I never got into those movies. I couldn't get like why people like them. Whatever.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
it's only so much Tim Burton I could take in my life. Like I have respect for the man, but it's only so much Tim Burton and Johnny Depp that I could take in my life, right? That's just me, right? But anyway, one thing I really admire about this movie is how, like I say, he draws from his own films, right? But this one, like it opens with the end of the film's climax, right? Which is always centered in the protagonist, which is similar to like what he did in The Devil's Backbone and Pan's Labyrinth. Like you always see the character at the most vulnerable. It's almost like if they're dying, they're almost like always bloodied up and whatnot, and you just sort of like thrown into it. You're just sort of wondering what's going on, right? There's a voiceover narration that's eerily similar to The Devil's Backbone that opens and closes the film.
Yes.
I like that it also borrows the same thematic beats from The Devil's Backbone. I had to write it out. Like ghosts are real. This much I know. And then, like in the end, she says there are things that tie them to a place very much like they do us. Some remain tethered to a patch of land, a time and date, right, and so on, right. And to me, that is really amazing that a guy like Guillermo could who already did a ghost story in his career, right, could draw inspiration from his own work, right. So for me, I kind of see the retrospect like here's what, like he's kind of telling all this is, look, if the only Spanish film you saw from me was Pan's Labyrinth, sorry, look, I did Devil's Backbone, I did Chronos. Please watch those. Like just watch them, please. You'll see more growth. That's what I'm trying to say here, right? Just seeing, right? Yeah. So speaking of Devil's Backbone, right? I love the idea of being tethered to a patch of land, right? Because with Devil's Backbone, it was about all the characters, right? Human and that one ghost character being connected, being stuck in this orphanage, right? And it just adds to the tragedy of the film, right? Where characters want to leave, but they can't because of the Civil War, and their memories and dark secrets that's tied to this one place, right? So just the idea of being tethered to this place, right? I love how it's pretty much reflected in this movie in the characters of Thomas and Lucille Sharp, who's played brilliantly in my opinion by Tom with Hiddleston and Jessica Chastain, right? And about the relationship that they have, right? About that, I love how Guillermo, right, who of course wrote the script, right? I love, co-wrote actually, believe it or not. He actually co-wrote it. I forgot who the co-writer was, right? But yeah, I love how he gives and he withholds information about their relationship, right? So in the first act, they introduce his brother and sister, right? And there's a moment where there's a ball that takes place and you see them kiss each other, right? But that's right after Thomas himself enters the building as Edith's chaperone, right? But the thing is, like, like when I saw it for myself, I was like, wait, why that scene sort of why the camera lingers on them so, like, just, it just feels like they linger on it for like about a couple seconds too long, the kiss. And then they just sort of watch each other for a bit, like, wait, this scene kind of runs a little too long. What's going on here, right? But that's the first red flag that the movie throws at you, right? And then when Edith actually marries Thomas, right? And then they move to Allerdale Hall, which is in England. There's like these moments where, Guillermo actually shows that he's scheming on Edith, right? Because, Edith will step away. There's a moment where she asks, can I get a copy of the keys, right? And, oh gosh, Lucille's like, no, you'll get it later on, blah, 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 right? And then afterwards you see, you see Tom and Edith talk about like, okay, all right, we need to go along with this plan. And then afterwards, all right, you'll deal with her? Okay, you'll deal with her, right? So I love that Guillermo is kind of showing you, okay,
oh my God,
they have a scheme, they're doing something, right? But you're not really sure about what the full details are. You get a sense of what it is, right? Because it's set up early on. It's about signing deeds and making sure, and essentially it's all about both Tom and Lucille acquiring enough funds to run this pretty much this mining operation that's going on in their property. They just kind of mining this red earth, basically this red colored earth. So they're just kind of doing that now. But then you learn with Tom as well, right? You learn with him that, Thomas, I should say, right, that he's also an inventor. So he's like, all right, I want to kind of finance my inventions as well. So I need money, so you could tell, all right, this is what it is, right? But there's something else going on as well, right? I love how, the back of your head, right? what Guillermo does brilliantly, right? He plays with this question that everybody's thinking at this time, right? Are they really siblings though? Are they really? Because there's a great moment
Yes.
where, like, in the States, right, where Charlie Hunnam, right, he plays Alan McMichael, right? So I love how it's very creative how how his character's portrayed, right? Where they're doing this clever twist on the Sherlock Holmes archetype, right? So, like, in retrospect, I feel like this is like a play on Robert Downey Jr., going back to, Avengers, right? Him playing Sherlock Holmes in the Guy Ritchie films, right? Like, oh, it's an American playing a British man, right? Ah, okay, right? And then, of course, you'd have Benedict Cumberbatch, again, going to Marvel, playing Sherlock in the TV show, right? But yeah, here's like this American guy playing detective here. I thought that was really clever, right? But yeah, there's a moment where he sees this newspaper article. It's like, wait, and you learn that Thomas was married. So like, wait, is Lucille his wife? And you're not sure. You're just thinking, oh, he's married. So you think, all right, well, Lucy's married, right? And then, okay, you're going on with it, right? And then there's this ring, this blood red ring that becomes the wedding ring, basically, that Edith owns, right? When she gets it through Thomas, right? It's like, oh, okay. And then there's a moment where Lucille takes it back. It's like, okay, well, that means Lucille is actually Thomas's wife. All right, okay. But then when Edith realizes what's really going on, though, that's when the movie drops the bomb. That's when they drop the bombshell on you. It's like, yep. They were siblings all along, and they were having an incestuous relationship for years. And then they dropped the big one of the biggest bombshells in the movie is like, we was doing this for years to the point that our mom picked up on it, and Lucille, because she kind of psycho, grab a knife and pretty much, a chopper basically, and basically kills your mom. And that's when you're like, oh shit, that is how real this is. Wow.
We get some Game of Thrones shenanigans going.
Yeah, that is some Game of Thrones shit. Like, wow, right? And even more so, Lucille kills Edith's father though, in what is still a very brutal scene. I would not lie. I saw that, I jumped and I was like, wow. I didn't see that moment coming. I know the movie would have given me violence, but I did not expect early on to see a guy get his head pretty much smashed through a sink. I love just creatively, right? Where the taps are running. Like, the taps are running when his head bursts through that sink. So by the time his head actually hits the ground, well, when his body hits the ground now, the water that's been pooling up in the sink is already blood red, and it just spills down onto the floor. I love that, but it's just like, okay, in my head I was thinking, okay, Thomas would have done that, but then when they reveal, oh, is Lucille do that? I was like, God damn. She did that, and that is generally like the most brutal scene in the whole movie. I would go as far as saying it's more brutal than that scene where the guy in the villain in Pan's Labyrinth take that flask and literally bashes the guy's head in with it, like literally hits him in the face with it until he dies. I would say it's more brutal than that, because that scene was brutal, but this one was like, wow, that tops it, right? But the reason why I compare their relationship to, the Devil's Backbone is that whole elaborate, it's just about, ensuring that they have to stay in this one place. And I love that they set up early on that the place is worn down. It's weathered down. I love, just from a production design standpoint, how like the roof has holes. So you're just seeing like, you're seeing snowflakes just falling down into the floor. I love that, right? But that's the idea, like, look, we need to renovate this place. We need to stay here, even though we basically kill our mother there.
Yeah.
And our father was abusive to us, but we still have to keep this place because there's value, and if we keep it running, if you keep the business running, we can make money and all that kind of stuff, right? And poor Thomas, so I have to say poor Thomas, because he just have to keep using his swagger and be like, look, I'm just gonna find some baroness or some rich woman, and I'm just gonna marry her and charm and whatnot. But then eventually I'm just gonna get my creepy ass sister to kill her. And that's just why I just gonna keep doing it, right? And I love like this character wise is he's at this point he's like, look, I'm done, I don't want to do this again. Like, after this, I'm done, right? I love that. I love these little moments. That's really good, Yeah. But with all the death and all the ghostly stuff going on, right? There's still this compelling romance because I'm talking about all the dark stuff, but there is a genuinely compelling romance going on between Thomas and Edith. And yeah, that is pretty much the heart of the film, right? Because yes, the moments when they're on screen, when Tom and Mia are on screen, they have really magnetic chemistry together, right? I love how it just leans on gothic romance so much, right? So even when, Lucille drops the bombshell, it's done in such this melodramatic way, like, oh no, how could you? I loved you, Thomas. It plays out like that, even though she doesn't like say that word for word, right? So I love, again, just how unapologetically melodramatic this movie is, right? Like it. I love that. But yeah, so take a break. Yeah. Your thoughts on just the how it plays on the whole reveal with Lucille and Thomas, and also how it just leans so much on the melodramatic elements as well. I'll get to the gothic stuff in a while, but yeah, any thoughts on what I just said? Yeah,
I will say, I will say that, like, I think, and not to repeat too many of the points that I made in the original review, which if you at home are listening, definitely go listen to Matthew's back catalog. It will help him a lot. But not to repeat those points too much. But one of the things I really love about the movie is how much it does commit to the gothic romance. And the thing about gothic romance is that in gothic romance, the violence and the melodrama are just as much a part of the genre as the ghosts are. What if you read things like Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, and then you read even some of the older Gothic texts, things like The Monk and Castle Vetrano, things like that. It really is writers who are playing with just kind of a whole bunch of different stuff, because Gothic romance takes place firmly within the melodrama within the melodrama format, which is very much the mode of heightened drama and very much the mode of elevated drama. Like this idea of like everything has to be big, everything has to be sweeping, everything has to be. This is why I think the Douglas Sirk comparison you made earlier is apt. Because obviously he's not working with ghosts, but Douglas Sirk is working within that melodrama context. And so there is a lot of DNA that's going on there. This is why, two movies that Del Toro flagged as, direct inspirations of Crimson Peak, films that I saw actually. I hadn't seen at the time I saw it for the first time, but since then I've seen both of them, and I actually think I own both of them now, are the black and white adaptation of Jane Eyre with Orson Welles and Dragonwyck with Vincent Price. And I think it's one of the things I love. It's similar to what in Indian cinema they talk about, like masala cinema, where you just kind of mix all these different modes together and create all these different things going on at once. I think that's one of the things that makes it's the thing that is both the great strength of Gothic romance. It is also the thing that puts most people off, because people who come to a Gothic romance wanting, just straight horror are going to be like, oh, what's all this stuff about romance and a manor and, people trying to keep the manor alive? Like, come on, what's going on with all that? But on the other hand, if you're someone who came just for a period romance, the incest is going to put you off.
Oh, yeah. And speaking of that, right, before we move forward, right, speaking of that, right, I can't be the only one. I can't be the only one who saw that moment where Edith sees Thomas and Lucille in bed and not think like that shot alone with Tom with the shirt on looks like something out of some sort of like the cover of some sleazy romance novel. Like I saw that, especially with the tie on. I was like, that is straight up a book cover moment right there. That's a book cover right there. That shot, I was like, wow, Del Toro, wow, yeah.
Like if Crimson Peak was a book, that would be the cover.
That's the good film, the whole film is like a total pot boiler, like it's that, like it's very, campy, and it plays with that a lot of these like, whoa,
it's salacious. It is salacious. Let's be real here.
But in the hands of a great filmmaker, you turn something from like that into something like generally that you just like dismiss it as kind of trashy and cringy. But with good filmmaking, you can always fix anything like that. Like people forget the original Godfather was that, the book kind of sucks, a little bit. Right? The movie people consider this masterpiece, but the book itself, the original book, not that great. It's like almost like a borderline airport novel kind of thing, right? Yeah, it's one of those.
Yeah,
So
very,
it's that.
it's very considered trashy and pulpy and that kind
Right.
of thing. And yeah, when
Exactly.
the Gothic novels came out back in the day, they were very much dismissed as trash. Like, it's so
Yeah.
weird to think about, especially a novel like Jane Eyre. But just like Wuthering Heights, Jane Eyre, like anything the Brontes wrote, they weren't loved when they first came out. It really took time for critics to be like, no, these are really, really good. And yeah, and I think that the big thing that most people objected to, especially on the quote unquote moral grounds, was the like quote unquote trashy and the shock, and like what you're flagging as like the shock value of it all. The like, this is a set piece that's built around the idea that this reveal is, you know, big and shocking, and like, you're like,
Right.
the reason we all have that image from that scene in our minds is because, on the one hand, yes, it is a beautifully composed shot. Also, because of everything that's been happening in the film up until this point, we feel, I think the character's name is Lucy. We feel Lucy's. No, it's no,
Well,
it's Mina,
Lucille, yeah.
Lucille,
But sorry,
because he names her
well, the
Cushing.
lead, all right. So Mia is the lead; she plays Edith, right? So it's Edith is the lead, but Lucille
Edith,
is the villain.
yes.
Yeah, Edith.
Yeah, sorry, Edith's character. Because the thing about, also, I need to get this out there. Del Toro is such a nerd because his main character's name is Edith Cushing.
Right.
Edith for Edith Wharton, who wrote Age of Innocence,
Oh,
and Cushing for Peter Cushing.
Yeah, I knew the reference there.
Yeah.
I knew Cushing. That's easy. I didn't know where Edith was from. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, Edith Cushing. Because Del Toro was a nerd.
Yeah, and it's from the author of Age of Innocence. So you see, I was onto something.
Exactly,
I knew it's something, right?
You are.
Yeah, but yeah, just
the same time period. It's the same time period. The Gilded Age in America.
Yes,
Right.
yes, exactly. Right. So just to wrap things up, right? So
Because at the same time, what TV show was going on that was doing that whole Gilded Age thing? British show.
not
they had a bunch
Downtown
of-
Abbey.
Downtown Abbey. Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's
and
that same thing.
yeah,
I
never
an
got
American
on board.
Gilded Age.
Never got on board. I know there's a new film that's supposed to be the end of the series, but
Right.
I never got on board. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
Right. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Right. So, just to wrap things up, right? So, you talk about, all the the romantic stuff, right? What about the gothic stuff? What about the ghost stuff, right? So for me, I love the visual effects of the ghosts themselves. I love, like, in true Guillermo fashion, they don't just look like ghosts, right? There's details to them, right? Like with Edith's mother, for example, I love that she shows up as Black Ash. Design wise, just basically a skeleton wearing a black dress with a veil, which is clearly, what she was buried with, right? And I am assuming that these are Thomas's wives. They're not just one ghost that pop up in the manor. I love that, I love how it plays with, is it one ghost or is it just like a group of them? But then you learn, no, because Lucille is just, a crazy bitch. Though she kills them and basically, leave the bodies there, right? So yeah, they basically died in Allerdale Hall, right? And it's never said where they died, like where specifically they died, right? But one in particular, right? There's actually a great review, right? Where one of the ghosts comes out of like this red like liquid, right? In one of the vats that's in the basement there. I was like, that's a great moment. That's a great moment, right? Also, I like this nice little callback to, Devil's Backbone, where one of the ghosts in particular has blood seeping out of like a wound on the head, and how the blood looks, it looks like mist or gas coming out. I was like, that is straight up from the Devil's Backbone. I love that. Again, just pulling from his own material. That's great. Yeah.
Oh my God. So one of the things that really leapt out to me, because I actually rewatched Devil's Backbone this year, and then I had rewatched Crimson Peak last year, and I picked up on something. Del Toro's ghosts, the way Del Toro and his artists design ghosts, the ghosts tell you in a fascinating way how they die, and because again, both Devil's Backbone and Crimson Peak are mysteries. We have a main character, and the ghosts are trying to help the main character solve their own murders, which is fascinating. If you know anything about Gothic, anything like that, that's a pretty common convention within the Gothic. As an audience member, you very subtly get clues about ghost. So, like, again, the ghost in Devil's Backbone, if you are at all familiar with that movie, you know that this character, you know where this ghost's body is. And if you look at the state of the character and what they look like, the movie is telling you where the body of this character is.
Right.
In Crimson Peak, the ghosts are doing the same thing. The way the ghosts are designed is subtly not only telling you where their bodies are hidden, but how they died. Which once you figure out in that movie where the bodies are, literally where the bodies are buried, it does become this moment of like, oh wait, like, yeah, and like the ghosts we see in the manor are the wives and the mother. And the mother is the most menacing. The ghosts of the wives just kind of like point and like indicate and try to like guide the character to help solve their own murder. The ghost of the mother is the most evil, is the best way. I mean, she's not, yeah, I mean, we learn that she is an absolutely like, you mentioned earlier the father is abusive. They mentioned that the mom is abusive, but she's just abusive in a different way. Right. Like less overtly violent than the dad is. And so she is, it makes complete sense then, for example, that her ghost is also just like this, is the one that's like the most obviously unpleasant to be around. And also like the fact that we don't find out until later how she died, but when we first see her ghost and we see the state of her head in particular, it's like, oh, right. You did not meet your last hour was unpleasant.
Right.
Really.
Yeah.
But, it's such a good work of design, honestly, visual design. It reminds me of another ghost movie that Del Toro is obsessed with, and I highly recommend, especially as we're moving into the holiday season, is The Changeling, directed by Peter Mendak.
I need
George
to see
C.
that.
Scott.
I need to see that. I've heard a lot of great things about that film. Yeah.
I cannot recommend The Changeling enough. It is one of the best ghosts. Again, it's a simple premise. Like, you have this ghost that is trying to get the protagonist to help solve its own murder. But the murder, in the case of The Changeling, is actually caught up in this remarkably complex, like, political thriller stuff. It's such a good. It's so funny because Peter Mendak, the director, was just like met Del Toro randomly at one point, and it's a movie that like he mostly gets a lot of respect for, but not like a lot of love for. And Del Toro meets him, and he just spends the whole time gushing about how good The Changeling is. So yeah, and when you watch The Changeling, you go, oh, okay, someone watched this, and that person went on to make Devil's Backbone and then Crimson Peak.
Yeah. So one last thing about the ghosts, and then we'll wrap things up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I love just like how poetic the film ends, like visually, right? In terms of Thomas's and Lucille's ghosts, right? Because surprise, surprise, they die, right? So I love the fact that, Thomas has this sort of like pale look to him. There's like this red brown hue on his shirt and like what looks like dried blood stains on his face, right? So he looks almost like white, almost pale, and especially when he's shown it's outside, so it's already snowing and whatnot, right? While Lucille, right, because of her character, and I just love that this is the final shot that we see in this movie. And here's the thing, like I saw the final shot and I didn't think about this particular moment, but then like it just sort of hit me again when I was like thought about it, right? Yeah, how it starts off with the shot of her keys, right? Of the same keys that she had basically. So yes, even in death, she owns these keys because again, she's tethered to his house, right? But I love that she is dressed in the same exact way that the mom did, black dress and whatnot, and she's playing on the piano the same lullaby. Okay, learn about this early on. Yeah, there's a lullaby that her mom used to play for them. I love that she's on this piano playing the lullaby. That is just such a poetic way to end this film. Like, even though
so chilling.
Even though she like despises her mom, she kind of is connected to her now, like eternally. I love that. That's a great way to end that film, right? Not just poetic, but very bittersweet in a sense. I would say more tragic than bittersweet as well, because the tragedy is that they are bound to this place forever. Yeah. Like you despise her, but at the end of the day you feel sorry for her because again she can't leave this place, and neither can her brother. And that's the end of the film. I love it. Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. So just to get to final thoughts and rating. It's a shame that this movie was, it's not. I don't want to say the movie was misunderstood or anything like that, because I know it got a lot of critical praise, right? But just the mere fact that it didn't make as much money as it could have, it's a shame, right? And it's coming from Universal of all places, right? But yeah, I actually note to self, I need to get a hold of that Arrow video Blu-ray release of it. It's just that they have a 4K Blu-ray attached to it, and I don't have a 4K player as yet, and I need to get one. But yeah, I need to get that in my collection, because this movie is great though. It's one of those films that I knew was great over the years, but I just never took the time to sit down to like rewatch it. So yes, this literally was the second time I watched the film, and yeah, I was like, wow, this movie was so good, boy. But like, people don't really talk about it these days. Wow, because they'll still talk about the Pan's Labyrinth and Shape of Water, stuff like that, right? Which is understandable. But yeah.
A film that grows on you. It's a film that really grows on you the kind of longer you sit with it.
Yes. And I could see myself over time loving the film even more, right? But I would say just lastly, as before I get to written, Del Toro took a huge risk here, in my opinion, making this film here, because he's stepping away from the big budget extravaganza that was Pacific Rim, right? And basically saying, here's what, like, I am an author to my core, and these are the films that I want to make. These are the kind of films that fascinate me. And I'm gonna take a swing here. I'm gonna do a genre that you don't see in Hollywood filmmaking at all, right? And the end result is, yes, a great film in my opinion, right? And again, because I compared it to like Barry Lyndon and Age of Innocence, it's like, it's a director pretty much saying, look, I am on my way to authorship. This is me really carving out my lane here. So yes, you can enjoy films like Hellboy and Blade 2 and Pacific Rim. I just want you all to know that's not just me, right? There's other stuff about me that really define who I am. And you could call them artsy for, if you want to, but those films really, really define me. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much been the shape of his career, because of this film, right? And yeah, this you could say was the start of it all, right? And I can't be mad at that. So for me, rating wise, I'm gonna give this a light 4.5 out of 5, man. I feel like over time, it could be a 5 out of 5 over the years, but for me, I really, really need to add this to my Blu-ray collection. I really need to own this in my collection one way or the other, right? So, but yeah, I still say, if you saw it before and you didn't care for it, I say rewatch it, and you should appreciate it even more, given where Del Toro's career is right now. I'll close this. I would say that because, Frankenstein is coming out later on, yeah, I think now is a perfect time as any to recap this film. I think now is a perfect time. Or if you haven't seen it, now is a great time to watch this film. Okay, yeah, this movie is great. It's one of his best films, bar none. So Ricardo, final thoughts, written.
This one I appreciate a lot more than I thought I would have. As it is, I went in not thinking anything of it, and it's only because of CC's review, and then I was like, oh yeah, no, they kind of cook here. This is really solid stuff, all things considered. The reveal is you kind of saw it coming a little bit, but it was still funny what the big reveal was, and it's just amazing filmmaking all true on true. And yeah, I really like this movie. Yeah, rating about an 8 out of 10. I did love it all, gush about it, but it's something that you strongly appreciate as just good cinema.
Agreed. And of course, CC, final thoughts and rating.
Yeah, I definitely 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, A+, thumbs up, whatever rating we're doing, right? Like as I've already mentioned, it is a film that signifies the direction that Guillermo Del Toro's filmography is going from this point on. And as someone who was already there and has just kind of stayed along for the ride and hasn't been disappointed, I think it's so interesting that aside from Nightmare Alley, that I feel like people are a little more split on, after Crimson Peak, the man just goes from kind of strength to strength to strength to strength, right? Like immediately after this, we get Shape of Water, we get Pinocchio, we've got his Frankenstein coming up, and really even doing this podcast making me realize that oh yeah, this is Del Toro revisiting a genre he's always loved 10 years later, and he's bringing a lot of the same collaborators to do it, right? Like there's something quite poignant about that, and thinking about my own personal relationship to it. It's a movie. It's one of those movies that has grown so personal to me that I'm sure that someone could be like, well, there's all these objective problems with it, and I'm like, well, criticism isn't really about objectivity. It's about finding the art that you champion. It's about spreading the word on it. And like, I mean, it's actually humbling to hear Ricardo talk about like, oh yeah, this is a film I would not have watched, but then like having you on the show and you talking about it made me go watch it, and I really enjoyed it. And like, also sounding like that I kind of put it into context in a way that was very helpful, especially at a time where the marketing was admittedly doing the film no favors. So
Right.
yeah, it's not. I don't know. There was a time in my life where I would not have maybe put Crimson Peak on like my Mount Rushmore of Del Toro movies. But over time, it has kind of crept its way on there. I feel like definitely in my top. I mean, the man's only made, oh goodness, I think the man's only made like what, 10 films, roughly thereabouts. But like, and like picking like top 5 or top 3, like I'd say top 5, if not my top 3 Del Toro movies. But definitely an incredibly personal movie, a movie that kind of signaled where I wanted to go as a critic, and a movie that I feel like has only gotten better with time. And I really appreciate like what you're saying, that like the film has, as Del Toro has cultivated the kind of audience where the film has finally found its following. Because you're right, for a film that back in the day, there weren't a lot of people with super kind things to say about it, and mostly like, oh god, this new Del Toro movie is really disappointing. I feel like mostly when I see people talk about it now, it's almost nothing but good things. Like I see a lot of people being like, this one is great. This movie is like, I really appreciate this one. Like, oh my god, this was so slept on at the time. I didn't see this in theaters. I really wish I had. And the fact that like Arrow's coming out with like a collector's edition is like very, like it's nice to see. It's nice to see a cult classic kind of find its cult audience in that.
Well, that's the stuff in it. It's out already, you know.
Yeah.
It's out. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's really fun to see. It's really great to see. I always love. I feel like one of the things I try to do as a critic is to connect films to their audiences. Like I don't like trying to go for super broad appeal with the things I talk about or the things I write about, but I like connecting people to the very specific works of art that I think they will enjoy, I think. So yeah, and Crimson Peak was kind of, the more I think about it, the more the beginning of that for me. Like, especially when I think about like early on in your show, like there are takes I had early on in your show that I don't stand behind. Like I am on record defending the first Suicide Squad. I retract almost everything I said in that video. But I stand by my Crimson Peak position. Great movie. Phenomenal.